Welcome to Move Like This, brought to you by the Accounting Move Project and sponsored by Moss Adams, the Center for Accounting Transformation, and CPA Trendlines. On this podcast, we share ideas and hear from guests about how they find, retain, develop, and advance women and other underrepresented groups in their accounting firms. Now, on to our guest. Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Move Like This. Today, I am looking forward to talking to Jim Wallace. He is the CEO of BPM, a firm that is nationally recognized for its people-first culture and commitment to inclusion. With more than 40 years in public accounting, Jim started when he was 12. And he leads strategic growth while championing inclusion efforts across the profession, including his service on the AICPA Women's Initiative Executive Committee. So thank you, Jim, for being here today.
I'm glad to be here, buddy. And the 40 years, somebody said, you don't need to say that. And I said, I'm proud that I've been in the business 40 years. It's not, that's nothing to be keeping a secret.
No, you should be, for sure. Well, let's jump right in. And it seems that somehow or other, and I'm sure you'll help us understand that, BPM has cracked the code with a culture that prioritizes DEI as more than just kind of corporate rhetoric. How did you get past the check the box mentality to make inclusion just a natural part of BPM's DNA?
So I love the thought that people think we've cracked the code. So we are always cracking the code. So that's part of the answer to the question, is that it's never ending, ongoing. One of the big things that we did, and I think other firms should think about doing, is this was a CEO-led part of our cultural development from our very beginnings. So BPM stands for Because People Matter, and that's always been our focus. That's our brand promise. And so when I joined BPM 10 years ago, I was the DEIB champion and stayed in that position up until about 3 years ago when we hired a new CPO who was certified and had been taken classes at the university and the whole 9 yards. And then we made that switch. And then when he left, I went back in until we had another replacement, our own friend, Lindsay Stevenson, who was chair of the Women's Initiative Executive Committee at the AICPA. So that's a big part of it, is making sure that it's led by the CEO or at the top. That's the key. Another big piece is that we don't look at how we engage with women or any other group as an initiative. It's not a part of a task, right? It's a part of our culture. So again, it's what makes Because People Matter important. It's all people. And so it's woven into everything we do, our brand promise. It's woven into our mission, our vision. It's part of our values. We have a key pillar in our strategic plan dedicated to DEIB. And so the whole thing it's foundational, as opposed to a task or an initiative. It's foundational to who we are.
Wow. And that makes it feel authentic too. That it's not something, one, I would say that these efforts to make people feel like they belong and to create a culture that encourages that is never something that's done. Like you say, it is something that you're constantly in the progress of doing, and what needs to be done sometimes changes and it's different for different people. So the fact that it's just kind of part of your, like I said before, DNA and your strategic plan is probably one of the reasons why you have the reputation that you do.
And we have very diverse leadership. So I don't know this, I've never proven this fact, but I believe that in the top 50 or top 100 firms, we might be the only firm that is more than 50% non-white. And so that gives us a opportunity to have diversity in everything we do. So our in committee inclusion now committee is made up of 16 people, but very diverse executives, leaders. So again, that keeps the momentum going. It role models to everyone else, and so on. So those are all parts, and I readily admit that we have an advantage being with most of our people in California. It's an environment that's very supportive and allows us an opportunity to be very diverse. I spent much of my career in Michigan. We didn't have that same degree of opportunity to be as diverse as we can be. We always had the ability, right, to try, but we didn't have the same opportunity to be as successful as we do with so many of our people in California.
Yeah. And one of the things that you mentioned before to me was that you actually measure your success. And tell me a little bit about how you do that and even some of the results of your most recent engagement surveys.
Yeah, we do measure success, and we use engagement surveys, colleague engagement surveys as our key. So last year, we had 82% of our people say that they felt like they could bring their authentic selves to work. So that was really important to us and a key factor in our measuring our success and determining where we are is what that percentage is. We want it to be really high. And we do most of that through our engagement surveys where we go out to all of our colleagues and have specific questions around overall engagement, but we have multiple questions around about their ability to feel like they belong, to be themselves, to feel supported, to have avenues from which to share and learn. And so that's all built in. And then we act on those programs or those responses. So, for example, we've been really focusing the last 24 months at least on belonging. Really trying to make sure that people, it's fine to have a diverse environment and to include people, but they really feel like they could be their authentic self. But that came directly out of one of our engagement surveys as an area that said, we could do better at that, and so we made a specific attempt and drove that part of what we do and who we are.
I think that's great. And that's pretty high numbers based on what I've heard from other firms. So that's a testament to what you're doing is working.
So if I could, yeah, just there. So we do it by level too. So like 69% of our next gen or our leadership or some firms will say partner and training programs, although we don't limit our leadership training to just future partners. So it's a broader group than that. But 69% of those participants are women. And we're intentional about that. Like, so I monitor that personally, like who's our candidates and how many do we have? 48% of that same group are people of color. And then we measure inclusion, which is one of the other categories. So 77% of our people said they felt like they were included. And that was pretty much the same. All these are pretty much the same as 22 to 24. 85% felt they were respected. 77% felt like they could make unique contributions. So those are the kind of questions that we ask. And then we know where we're weak and got to get better or what we're doing well. And then, of course, in the comments, they can say, you're not doing this at all, or I think you should. And we can do that too.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I've talked about previously that's so important because, I've worked with some firms to create those surveys and gather those results. And I always say when I'm talking to anybody, it's like, okay, this is a great effort, but if you're not going to do anything with this information, then it can actually hurt you more than it helps. Because if I'm an employee and I'm willing to, make myself raw or, give you
Get out
information
there.
that may
Yep.
be difficult to share, and then I feel like it's going into the void, then why would I do that again? So I do. I love the fact that you're actually taking that information and doing something with it.
So
So, go ahead.
it might be just a tad off topic, but it related to that. So one of the things that we got feedback on in our engagement survey is that there wasn't connectivity to what we were doing with it. So that was probably like 4 years ago. So we made this really strong effort. So every time we do a town hall, every time we do a communication, we connect it back to the engagement survey. So we report out, this is what you said, this is what we did this last quarter, this is what you said, this is what we did this last quarter. Because it came to us through the engagement survey that we weren't doing that enough.
Yeah. Well, kind of on that topic, I mean, you have very high numbers of belonging, which is, as I mentioned before, pretty impressive. But what specific approaches have you taken to kind of sidestep the trap of assimilation masquerading as inclusion?
Probably the most successful and impactful thing we do is our colleague resource groups. So some employee resource groups, but one of the things we did is we let our people vote on what they wanted to be called, and they voted and chose to call themselves colleagues. So that's what we do. So our colleague resource groups, that's a big part of how we give people the opportunity to learn and educate and be themselves through the colleague resource groups, and we sponsor speakers, and we have both supporters and members in those groups, and so that there's a good mix. They're not meant to build exclusivity, but rather educate and give people opportunities. So I would say that that's maybe the biggest thing that has been a real impactful. So we have about 1,100 people, and close to 700 and some are in participate in one or more of our multiple colleague resource groups.
Oh, that's great. What are some of those groups specifically?
Well, we have I have a list. We because I would hate to leave someone out. So we have the Hispanic Latinx group. We have parents and caregivers. We have disabilities. We have our WIN group. We have the our Black CRG, and now I know I'm leaving somebody out. So we have our Asian and Pacific Islander group, and I'm looking still. Oh, LGBTQI plus, and parents and caregivers. There you go. That's the whole list. And the parents and caregivers is one of the most recent groups we did. Interfaith was one of the more recent groups we added. The WIN group we've had since for 10 years almost. That was actually, we had our Women's Initiative Now group before we had our Inclusion Now committee. That was our kind of founder.
Wow. And you talk about them sponsoring events or programs and things like that. What types of programs are they sponsoring, and how are they, I guess, incorporated into firm activities?
So one of the great examples, because it's two groups getting together, but we do this several. I give you two examples of two groups getting together. But our interfaith group hosted a transgender rabbi, and he came and spoke. I'm sure it was video. He did a video presentation about his journey. And so that was a combined effort between our interfaith group and our LGBTQI plus group. And we also did one in our parents and caregiver group, along with our WIN group, which was about trying to manage your non-life at work. If you're a caregiver or a parent who's caregiving. And again, because the majority, as we all know, maybe everybody doesn't know, 70 to 80% of home responsibilities still rest with women in this country. And so that's a very dominantly women group. And so WIN did that combined with our caregiver group. And we had a speaker come in, and she talked about how to better integrate and manage your caregiving responsibilities with your work life. So those kind of things. We celebrate all the activities or months that may be Black History Month or so on, that may be part of those. Typically, I write something, or it could be the sponsor or executive sponsor of the group will send out a firm-wide email highlighting, and then we'll invite all firm members to attend. There's usually some kind of activity during that month, and everyone's welcome to attend that activity or that speaker presentation. We provide budgets for the groups so that they can do T-shirts or the They do bracelets. We had new pink bracelets that came out last month, and so on.
Oh, I love it. Well, let's go a little bit broader. And as you know, the national conversation around DEI is kind of becoming increasingly divisive, even hostile in some spaces, as I hate to say. How does BPM remain unapologetic in its commitment when, in some cases, the broader climate may encourage some backpedaling or disengagement?
So, a couple really things that are key or very foundational in that regard. So, we don't ever take any kind of political stance. So we don't support political parties. We don't support individual politicians. We don't support legislation unless it's very specific to business, legislation. Um, and when we take positions on DEIB activities, they're always driven from our core brand promise of because people matter, right? And so it's really a matter of just demonstrating why what we're saying or doing is good for people.
Hmm.
And doesn't matter what political views those people have. It doesn't matter what color they are. None of that matters. It's good for people. So we're comfortable going out there and taking a position on that. And sometimes you have to both. If it's conflict, sometimes you got to be on both sides because either both groups of people matter, right? And so how do we take a position that is fair and representative to different groups that might be in conflict over something? So that's a huge part of how we do it. And then and again, it's built in our mission. So our mission includes the wording of helping people be successful in work and life. So we can say and do a lot of things that other organizations might consider controversial, but we can tie it directly back. Is it helping that group be more successful in their work or in their lives? Then we don't hesitate to take a stance or publish a paper or put something on our website or post to our Facebook page or whatever. We don't hesitate to do that. As long as we're not being political about it, we're focused on our brand promise of because people matter.
Yeah, and I think that's where I feel like a lot of the conversation has gone a little bit awry in that it has is being positioned as a political effort, statement, whatever, when in reality, it is about people. It is, about creating opportunities for people and ensuring that our workplaces and our cultures are inclusive so that everybody feels like they belong. Because frankly, people that feel comfortable in their work environment are going to perform better for our clients and the firm. And so, I mean, there's huge business advantages to it.
They're going to be more creative, get better ideas. Yep, all
Mm.
those things. Yeah.
Well, and you mentioned too that your efforts are very metrics driven and that you are committed to tracking concrete results. Can you expound on that a little bit more and tell us kind of in some ways what it is you're measuring and what it is that you're finding?
So we tied to turnover, of course, retention, um, hiring. What we do surveys of new hires or of students. What's important. Um, just was listening to an update from a AICPA board member this morning, and they had just conducted a survey of students again, and DEIB is still critical to students looking for work. Nothing has changed despite what we may read or see in the press. That's still if you're in business and your business is people and you're trying to get the best people, I would recommend you not abandon anything you're doing in terms of being a diverse and flexible workplace. And flexibility is key to us too in terms of how we attract and retain people. So we have floating holidays. So if people who have specific needs that they want to take time off for, people we can do that. So those are all really important ways to ensure that we're keeping the promise and that people see the value. Then turnover is probably the biggest thing in terms of bottom line driven, right? If your turnover is less, right? So we always run less than the national average in turnover, and that's really important to keeping our best people here and happy. Um, and then engagement, we know that when colleagues are highly engaged, they're more productive. More
Mhm.
productive colleagues drive more profitable revenue. And so we can track how engaged our colleagues are, and if we make sure we keep that number high, and that keeps us highly profitable and moving forwards. But I get the conflict though. If it's there are people who just don't feel comfortable embracing diversity. And then we have to go back to the numbers. But my dad who was a CEO of a public company, he would always say it the other way around. If you do the right thing, you'll be successful in business, right? So I always don't, I don't want to do the right thing because I want to be successful in business. I want being successful in business to be the outcome of doing the right thing, not the motivator. And you get in the same place, it just feels different.
Yeah, yeah. And you know what? Not every person is going to be a fit for BPM, and BPM's not going to be a fit for every person. And that's okay. There's so many different places out there and variety of firms and environments and cultures and things that people focus on that I don't think anybody can try to be all things to all people and succeed.
Which is one of the reasons we have the work and life. It's one of the many reasons, but the life is it may not be at BPM.
Yeah.
So another thing my dad used to say all the time, if you judge yourself by how successful the people are who stay with you, then you're going to be a failure a lot because people leave, right? If you judge yourself by how successful you help them be in their goals, you'll be successful much more often because their goal may be to go somewhere else or do something else. And if you help them do that, right? And who doesn't want to be more successful than less successful, right? So, yeah,
Kind of the goal, right?
kind of the goal, right?
Well, I know we've had conversations in the past, but as a white male leader, what drives your personal commitment to DEI work? And how do you navigate the space in a way that builds trust and credibility with those whose lived experiences differ from your own?
Yeah. So this is always an emotional kind of topic. So I grew up in Saginaw, Michigan. Saginaw, Michigan is still known to be one of the most racially divided cities in the country. So when I grew up in the 70s there and 60s, there's a river that runs north-south. There's not many rivers in the northern hemisphere that run north-south. If you were on the east side of that river, there was a good chance you were black. You were 80 to 90% black. And if you were on the west side of that river, there's a pretty good chance you were white, 80, 90%. So very, very racially divided. And so really the first experience that I had that really stuck with me is I was doing Leadership Saginaw, is what it's called, but it's a leadership program for people who lived in Saginaw. And I intentionally chose an all black school on the east side. And I remember being in that school and thinking to myself, there's one of a handful of white people in the school, and thinking to myself, this is really weird and uncomfortable
Mm.
for me. And thinking that these kids, when they cross the river, they're in this environment every day where it's they're the minority. And that had really profound impact on me that day. And I was 28 years old or 29 years old. And that was the first time I'd ever been in a situation where I was a minority. And that had a huge impact on me. And that really got me motivated. But I'll go just, I grew up, I'm a baby boomer. And so I grew up with Depression era parents.
Mm.
And I grew up in a house where helping others was always key and important, right? So my mother would tell stories. Her family had a farm, and they would anybody who came to the door during the Depression got a meal, and they had to work, so they had to clean out the barn. My grandpa would joke that sometimes the barn got cleaned out 10 times a day, but everybody had to do a little something, and then they got a meal, and that was how and it didn't matter who they were, where they came from, what their background was. Anybody who came to the door got a meal. And my dad was, as I shared with you, he ended up his career as being a CEO of a publicly traded company. But back then, he was in the training group at a large multinational company around the world, and he was in the training group. And this was in the 70s. And he would talk over dinner how he would go through lists and make sure that in the management training programs, there was a representation of women and a representation of people of color, and he was doing that in the 70s on his own because it was the right thing to do.
Oh,
And so I grew up with that. That was the stories that I grew up with. But then uh, years later, when my daughter, who is Korean, when my daughter and we went to Hawaii, and we were sitting around the table. It was late at night. This day we arrived, and she started crying. And my daughter's got three older brothers. She's tough as nails. She never cries, never, and I'm like, honey, what's wrong? What's going on? And she was crying because she had never been any place where the majority of the people looked like her.
oh wow.
So that first experience when I was 28 or 29, and then that experience when I was 50, right? Glued together has like always made it a passion of mine. And I believe that we have to have white males engaged, right? If all the engagement is not with the people who hold the majority of the influence, then we're not going to have success, right? So that keeps me engaged, keeps me involved. And I hope, and I know because the feelings I've had, people see that and they respect that. You can't, you have to have diversity, right? So if there's no white men in the group, right, then we're still not doing it. We're still not getting the right uh, pressures, the right influences. We've got to have that. So that's how I got started. That's why I think white men have to be involved and they have to be accepted involved. And then what I've learned a ton, and it's just is grace. It's just people. I'm afraid. People are afraid. I'm afraid before I get on your podcast with you, I'm going to say something stupid, right? Some stupid white man thing, right? I'm going to say it and not mean to, right? But what I've learned is that people, if your heart's there, people give you grace.
Hmm.
They cover you. Like, Jim, that wasn't the right way to say that. And like, you're right, it wasn't, or tell me how I should have, or whatever. But so yeah, so I think that's what I think can make a white male credible and also make them important. And I'm not saying everybody has to have a life moving experience like I did, but that helps.
Hmm. Yeah, it does. And I love the kind of putting yourself in other shoes, literally in some cases by putting yourself in environments where you are a minority. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and have been many times where I am maybe the only or one of just a few white people in a room of black people. And what you learn from that, what it feels like to be a
Yeah.
minority, but also that it's not as big a deal as you think it is. People are people. And I think that's often what we wind up learning when we put ourselves in situations where either we're not familiar or we may fear that or just whatever it is we're feeling there. If we have kind of the guts to go through and be in a situation where maybe we're uncomfortable, we learn so much from that process.
So I have another one of those. It's humorous. I'll keep it short, but it's directly related to women. Is I try to regularly attend the AICPA's Women's Summit, and I was at the one of the early women's summits, and there was a handful of men there. And I was at a reception, and Joey Havens, I'm sure you know Joey. Joey was there, and a woman came up to me and she asked, "Have you seen Joey?" No, are you Joey? She asked me if I was Joey. And I said, no, I'm not Joey, but I know Joey. I can help you find him. And she looked at me kind of pitifully and she said, there's only five of you here. I'll find him. And I was like, why are there only five of us here? Like that was the first thing. But then, yeah, then again, I was like, just drove home that, yeah, I'm one of five men with 800 women. And it's a different feeling.
Yeah, it is. I'll share a story. I had a similar conversation with my husband and a really good friend of ours, another man. And this was kind of back when the Me Too movement got re-energized a number of years ago. And, we were talking about that and the fact that both of these men that I love very much were like, we really had no idea that the number of people that we know and the number of women that we love had gone through situations where they were, abused or just harassed or whatever that might be. And what happened was we wound up having a conversation about the fact that they were both absolutely in their actions and their support feminist, but they were not comfortable calling themselves that because they're
Oh,
like, well, we're men, and we support our mothers, sisters, friends, all the women in our lives, and we'll go to bat for you in a minute. And I'm like, that's what we need. We need allies. We need, and men, particularly white men, are often in that power position. And to have them as advocates and to have them helping, in some cases, fight the battles that, women or people of color or LGBTQ, whatever the group is that is a minority of sorts, if we can have other people go into bat for us, it is so much more powerful. So I love that, hearing those stories for sure.
one of the things we do maybe ties back to one of your earlier questions is we do a partner pledge. So every partner in the firm has to do an inclusion now pledge, and has several things. And I'm going to listen. I'm going to do all these things, but at the end, it is I'm going to select at least one person who is diverse, and I'm going to advocate specifically for them, and they have to write a name in for that year. And when we talk about advocating for somebody, they may not even know you're doing it, right? When you can coach, you can mentor, right? Then it's engaging, right? But when you advocate for somebody, you're in a room and somebody's saying, "Well, I'm going to give this job to Bob," and you say, "Well, why aren't you giving it to Sally?" Right? And then that's when you advocate, and they may never even know that you did that. But that's when you're like, why is that? Why Bob? Just because he's your golfing buddy? That doesn't make sense, right? And so that's part of what we do, but it makes every single partner understand what it takes to fight unconscious bias, to recognize that there's people out there different than them, and then that they have a specific responsibility to mentor everybody,
Mhm.
but advocate for at least one person that's different than them.
And in the end, Bob may be the best person for that job.
But
But
somebody's got to ask that question.
somebody has, but he may not be. So let's look at other candidates and make sure that the best person for that job gets in that role. And that having that process in place can only make the firm more successful and the individuals within the firm more successful. Well, as we're talking about all this, what would you say to other firm leaders who are interested in exploring what creating a more diverse and inclusive culture would look like at their firms? So, how does BPM maintain its momentum and turn good intentions into that measurable, lasting process? And, what would you tell others to do the same?
So I think we've talked a little bit about the kind of the foundation to get you started, which is surveying, engagement surveying, ask your people, right? And it's got to be authentic, and you have to really listen and ask the right questions. So there's people out there like you who can help do that, right? But you've got to ask the right questions and really try to get a baseline so do your people feel like they belong? Do they feel like diversity is encouraged? Are they included in activities and feel comfortable? So I would start with that, and I would also say that it has to be led from the top. So I really don't care how big you are. Like if you're a multi-billion dollar firm, at least the first year or 2 years, the CEO's got to be the face of that. Otherwise, it's just an initiative,
Mhm.
right? It's just another, don't worry about this. This will go away in 2 years. Nobody will care anymore, right? And that can't be it. It's got to be that that leadership from the top. Um, and I'd also would say to it. it needs to be part of your strategy. So all the reasons we talked about, it's good for business, right? Clients want to work with people who look like them. Our clients are really diverse, right? So you should have a diverse workforce. It's good for retention. It's good for all those things. So it needs to be part of your strategic plan, like anything else that's really important would be, and not just buried somewhere like, oh, we're going to be a people first organization. Like, what does that mean? And then the measurements come from that. So how am I going to measure that? And so when we talk about lead from the top, like our board chair sits on our in committee, right? Not just me, but the board chair, and we talk about our DEIB programs at every town hall. Everyone we have 4 a year. Every town hall we talk about what are we doing now and currently. So tone from the top. Have a established assessment process. Start with a baseline is key. Building it into your strategic plan so it doesn't become an initiative, right? It becomes core, fundamental. We all know we don't change our pillars in our strategic plans very often, right? So, you change your tasks year over year, but the pillars are pretty permanent. And so it should be one of those permanent pillars. And then, look at your demographic data. We report out, be very transparent. So we report out through a DEIB report to everyone in terms of progress we've made, what the numbers look like, what were activities that we did over the year. Remind everybody, celebrate the successes we've had. But the key would be if you start somewhere in middle management, it's going to be a passing phase.
Yeah, I think that's excellent advice. And I agree. It has to come from the top because,
And you don't have to do it forever. I did it for 7 years. I love it. I would do it forever, but you don't have to do it forever. But you got to do it long enough to keep the momentum in place.
yeah, for sure. Well, this has been incredible advice and just conversation, but I always like to close with some just kind of fun questions. So, first up, when you were young, 5 years old or whatever age you can remember, what did you want to be when you grew up?
And I get that question. So I speak to college kids or even kids in high school, and they say, "How'd you end up being a CEO?" Just kind of a off of that question. So I really don't remember much when about 5 years old, so I can't be specific about what I wanted. But again, I'm a baby boomer, so we weren't raised to have a specific career. We were raised to get a good job to support your family, right? That didn't matter what that job was. If it was a good job and to support your family, that was success. But as I said, I grew up in a home with parents and with my father who was a CEO when I was really making those decisions when I was 15, 16, 17. He was the CEO of a business, of a publicly traded company. And he would always talk about helping others be successful in life, work in life, which is one of the cool things about being a CEO is I can work that into the mission, right? Even though like my father gets to hear that, and from up above, he's hearing me talk about what's in our mission. And the best place to do that from was be a CEO. So somewhere around 15 or 16, I decided I was going to be a CEO of a business. And then I still hadn't settled on accounting, but decided that whatever I did, I was going to be the CEO, and because that was really, really important to have that kind of influence on people.
I like it. And there you wound up with that too.
And
So
I
many
did.
of these conversations, I wanted to be a fireman or, what. I like that the vision you set for yourself, you actually did accomplish. Well, secondly, if you were given the chance to travel anywhere, you don't have to worry about paying for it. You don't have to worry about taking the time off or working it into your schedule or anything like that. Where would you go and why?
So I have my first sabbatical of my 40-year career coming up. So actually, we've been thinking about this. So my wife and I love to ride horses, and she loves to be where it's warm. So we would go, and my sabbatical happens to be in the winter. So we would need to go someplace exotic and warm. So at the equator or south, and that we could ride horses. So a luxury, we're past the stage of roughing it, a luxury dude ranch. Or something like that in Argentina or New Zealand or something like that. That would be, and we actually talk about it. We haven't planned one yet. It's almost time. I got to pull the trigger on something here, but That's what we would do.
That sounds lovely. Um, and I look forward to hearing where you decide to go. And finally, if you could have one superpower, what would it be?
This one makes me laugh because for a couple of reasons. Because I think I haven't done any kind of scientific study, but I think men and women answer this question really differently. And because actually men sit around and fantasize about this like regularly. So it's like, so for me, I know exactly like, boom, was asked this question not too long ago. My wife and I were together and asked this question, and mine was like, boom, right away. I want to be invisible Superman with Wonder Woman's truth lasso. Like, so not just one. I can't, that'd be too easy, right? And
Yeah.
I want to be able to fly faster than a bullet, and I want to have strength, and I want to be invisible when I want to be, and I want to be able to make people tell the truth. And my wife's answer was to be able to communicate with every living thing to understand how the world works in which we live. And part of that superpower would be to be able to determine whether things are living or not. And she thinks we'd be surprised by what's a living thing versus what's not a living thing. She's much more spiritual than I am. And so after I heard her response, I changed mine. I said, I just want to be a woman because that'd be my superpower because they have way better answers than men to these kinds of questions. And so, yeah, so my first answer would be an invisible Superman with the lasso. But the real answer would probably be be better to be a woman and have all those superpowers. And my wife raised all of our kids. We raised all of our kids. I had three boys and a girl. That women had superpowers. They've been raised that way since they were babies, and the boys I know still believe it. And we work really hard with my daughter to make sure she always knows it too.
Oh, I love that. Well, there's no reason why you can't have all of that, right? I mean, it's an
Also,
imaginary world, right?
I could be a woman with superpowers and with Superman powers with the lasso.
Yeah.
Invisible. You got to be invisible though, because
You gotta be able to come in and out of
yeah,
invisibility. I
yeah,
like that. I really like the lasso of truth. Wonder Woman was like my ultimate idol when I was a kid. I grew up in the 70s and 80s
oh, yeah.
watching
Watching the cartoon, yeah,
uh
and
loved it.
yeah, and all the movies, absolutely, yeah.
Yep. For sure. Well, Jim, this has been just a wonderful conversation, and I so appreciate you taking the time to have it with me and all of the leadership that you're providing to the accounting profession. And I really appreciate the opportunity to learn more about what it is that you're doing.
I'm glad to be here. As you know, when we've talked before, it is a passion of mine and always will be. People say, "What are you going to do when you retire?" And this will always be part of my life is trying to make sure we help others be successful.
Well, I think you're doing a good job, and hopefully, it will influence others to kind of just take some advice and maybe institute some of the things that you've done at BPM. So,
Thanks for having me.
thank you. Thank you for listening to Move Like This, brought to you by the Accounting Move Project and sponsored by Moss Adams, the Center for Accounting Transformation and CPA Trendlines. If you'd like to learn more, visit our website at accountingmoveproject.com. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends and colleagues too. I'm your host, Bonnie Buol Ruszczyk, and until next time, keep moving forward.